check it out. Today we've got a product review of the 210 Stencil Cap. This is from the brand Krewline, and it offers a 2, a 4, and a 6mm stencil cap that also has an expandable reservoir here that you can actually fill right into a mop. You can see by all the paint here that I put this stuff through the works and really got an in-depth test on how all this performed. So stencil caps work by having the paint actually spray through a much smaller hole that's a little bit extended forward beyond the normal cap. So by the name, it stencils a smaller area that you can actually spray a much thinner line. The excess paint, however, normally just builds up on top of the can, and there's really not much you can do with it but get messy. The 210 has a pretty ingenious way of solving that problem by having this little slide and then the whole mop body to catch the rest. As you spray through the back here, all the paint then drips down into the open reservoir. You can then simply just drop a nib on top of there and use this as is. Each stencil cap also comes with a gray dot cap, which works great as a skinny cap for most European cans, and alternatively for cans that didn't quite work with the gray dot, I had no trouble finding caps that were skinny enough and worked great. So for a price point, each of these stencil caps comes in at 25 bucks a piece. That means you get one of the stencil caps, the mop body, a nib, and that gray dot. There are also combo packs available to get all 3 sizes, so you can grab the 2, the 4, and the 6mm for 65 bucks. This stencil cap was designed by a guy that goes by the alias of Twinkie. He has all of these 3D printed, which keeps costs pretty low, as well as that lets him revamp ideas and tailor the whole system into working flawlessly. He said he's gone through a bunch of design iterations through this, so I'm excited to see what the current performance is. So like always, when I'm sent a product, I'm still going to give you my full honest review about how it performed in my application. So without further ado, let's get into that. So I've moved all my equipment down here to the workshop, and then we're going to check out how different paint types work, as well as starting off with that little line test. I'm going to go through and test the sizing on the 2, 4, and 6mm 210 stencil cap, and then also compare that original kind of style stencil cap against them. We're going to start off with belting, and it's definitely recommended to shake your can up beforehand, and that's just to avoid any extra stress on the cap section. I've got the 6mm stencil cap here, so it's recommended to actually place this onto a flat surface and then use both hands to put it on, and that'll keep all the pressure even as you do set it down. So it looks like I am making contact with this color ring, so I'm going to just take that off. It's definitely a snug fit on the Belton can, and looking at this edge, it probably doesn't make contact with the cap, but now that it's off, no worries. Now I got the 6mm bottle, make sure to attach that on there. And then lastly, you're definitely going to want to make sure that you line this up with the center here. Keeping that as straight as possible will mean your line is as direct, so you're going to get the hardest edge to that smaller section. So my first impression with holding the can here with an extra glove on is that I am making a little bit of contact with that bottle. Now obviously the further away from the can this gets, it's going to be a little bit more stress on the support there, so I'm not complaining yet, but we'll see after a while if the rubbing there or as I play, if anything funky goes on. So here we go with the 6mm. Looks like we have a teeny bit of spitting to start, but let's do a couple other lines and see if that holds true once we do get a little bit of paint built up around the edges. You can see the paint is collecting nicely, and there's no spray on this front face. Awesome, so as I expected, once there is a little bit of paint built up around that edge, you're not going to really see much spitting coming out. I believe that's coming from, the paint's hitting onto some of the other paint off that edge and it's not actually able to shoot all the way out. You might be getting caught by some of that other paint around the edge, which is working out in our favor. Now let's go over and try out the 4. To remove this, I'm first going to take off the bottle, and I'll just set this off to the side. And then it's also recommended to use a twisting motion to get this off, not to try and leverage it up using this. My assumption there is you're going to put a ton of stress on this little section. So let's just spin this. And loosen a little bit. There we go. Pops right off. Now we'll do the reverse of that for the 4. I'm not going to spin this once it's on the can. I'd rather just spin the cap, line her up, and let's screw the new bottle on. Let's also take note about how much paint's around this edge to start the review, and we'll see if anything adds up as we do spray a bunch. So I didn't see any spitting at all with those 6 lines. You can see the density of that line is a little bit tighter. So you're gonna have a little bit more opacity there. It is a little softer at that 6. And I will say you can also kind of tell which direction my cap might not be totally straight on. You can see I'm getting a little bit of fanning over here to the left side each time. So let's see if I can straighten my cap out and fix that. But nothing around that edge. So definitely take the time to make sure your cap is super straight. Not that, this is the end of the world while you're maybe filling in some area, but if you are trying to get a really specific line down there, you're not going to want to have that weird overspray off to the one side. Let's move on to the 2. Now that is a super skinny line. You can see that there was a teeny bit of spitting on the very first spray, but aside from that, that was totally cleaned up throughout the rest of them. Now you can see I was actually able to get some lighter effects here by not pressing the cap down entirely. Then here on this line I did the double back over to make sure that wasn't a mistake. And even when you press the cap entirely down, you're getting a solid line but no extra business around the edges. I'm definitely excited to get started on the painting now. All these sizes look awesome. The edges to these lines are super duper crisp. And I'm hopeful that I might actually be able to get some fading using the bigger ones. Taking a quick look at the inside of the 2mm, you can see that all the paint's really getting caught inside there. This slightly open and white rounded section on the front is definitely in the line of sight of that cap, but all the paint's making its way in there, so definitely a solid design job there. You can see some of the paint's made its way all the way down. Here we got our little slide for the paint to run down, and as you can see there's absolutely no drips coming out of the front section. It's all getting caught in there. So after using the can to make that fill there, I was using an assortment of caps trying to get the best results out of the iron lac can. And that has a few notes, but we'll start off with the fact that it's filled up probably about 3/4 of this mop here already. Part of that is due to the fact that I was using a Montana level 3 to see how the larger cap would actually work. I could tell that there was way more paint coming out than required, and I would attribute a lot of the bottle filling up to using the larger cap. That being said, I also switched over to an iron lac vegan. That worked probably even better because the line was more concentrated. The vegan is a skinnier line, but it does have pretty good high output, so I was able to get some pretty nice fills, and it kind of actually reminded me of filling with a normal can, just really miniaturized, which is basically the idea here. So you can see that we do have some overspray here. This section over here was because I was using that larger cap, it actually bubbled over a little bit there. But aside from that, everything else looked pretty good. I did end up taking the donut off of this. The donut was getting in the way of this laying really flat against the top of the can, and that was kind of causing a little bit of trouble with getting the cap lined up with that hole. Once I took that off, it was able to get low enough that it was totally snug, so just keep that in mind. You may need to do that with iron lac cans because even the new ones do have that full ring. I'm going to try and give a quick comparison with just the gray dot on and see what kind of difference in opacity and coverage we might get with just using the actual cap. So here we can see some slight opacity issues. That's really just because this is paper. This is from using the Stencil Cap, so you can see a little bit of the sectioning here with those thin lines, but it's just setting in a little bit. Even with these darker colors, there's not really going to be any show through. So I'm not too worried about the opacity here on a full, maybe painted wall application. We're seeing very similar effects over here using just the cap. I'm sure after a few more layers, this won't be an issue at all, so let's keep on working. We've definitely made enough paint by this point. Let's give the mop a little test. This body's a little hard to squeeze by itself. I'm going to put it in one of the thinner bottles. You see kind of almost foam up in there? You can definitely see more of the solvent is getting released as I agitate this. I wouldn't have guessed that to happen. This would be a lot easier to squeeze and not totally just put drips all over the thing. When you press down and actually engage the nozzle that's in the nib, it kind of sprays out a little bit, and that gives it a really fast drip effect, so I'm going to take this slow. Lost the paper just there. I have to find a way to fix up those. So fast note is I just had a big drip come down. You can see the fresh orange all over my fingers. Basically happened when I turned the can a little bit too much, the paint rolled back out that top section. Definitely don't anticipate shaking the cans or tipping them or anything like this. Even if you're painting with a slight angle to your can, it might end up having some drip out. So definitely keep the can vertical as best possible. So some of the original streaking issues I saw was definitely because I wasn't pressing the valve totally in on the mop. Once you engage that valve, the paint flows super quick. Spray paint's a lot thinner than your standard off-the-shelf mop paint, and that leads to these crazy drips we're seeing. And when the mop bottle is totally full, there's literally no streaking involved. Because the paint is so thin, it's going to flow out super fast, so you do have to move a little quick, and that also means you're going to be using a little bit more paint, so you're going to be running dry a little bit faster than some of those thicker mop styles. But altogether, you're at least reusing some of the paint you'd waste anyways, so this is a great bonus. Now let's take a look at the 210 stencil cap after a bunch of use and see where we've got some paint buildup and some other things. So let's first crack open this lid. You can see we even have paint on the top section of the lid. If I were to have to guess what that's from, it's probably tipping this around and having some of the paint roll up to that top side. You can see there's a little bit of leaking towards the edges here. None of that ended up making it onto the body of the reservoir, but maybe after a ton of use you're going to see a little bit of leakage there. Around the top of the can it's pretty clean actually. You can see that there is now more overspray towards these side sections, whereas after just the first initial use, I wasn't seeing anything on these two wide flanges. I really like how the top of the can is maintained to be super clean. There's no really drips around that section. Let's actually jump in to see how this would look using that old stencil cap style. So here we have the before can. You can see we just got some little spray where the edge was coming off. Snapping that stencil cap on, and then lining up our dot. Let's see how it looks. We're getting some pretty nice lines here, but the drawback here is you can see all the paint is now just hanging out at the top of the can. After maybe a minute spraying this, you're going to have this entire section filled with spray paint. The general practice to get rid of this is just flicking your can and spraying it onto the ground or the nearby area. If you have to worry about that every 30 seconds or a minute, it's really going to hurt your overall productivity of getting that piece done. Having that reservoir off the side is huge to alleviate any downtime in between sprays. So when removing the 210 stencil cap from the can, I found it was easiest to have a little screwdriver on hand. And then by simply putting it under the edge of this ring here, and then twisting to pry it up a teeny bit, and then moving that around the top of the surface, I can feel more confident pulling this off. It's a super snug fit around the top of the can, so when kind of spinning it and doing that initial motion, I didn't feel that it was going to break by any means, but I'd rather not risk it with something like this. I found I could more efficiently go around and snap this off with confidence that it wasn't going to hurt it at all. I did, however, throughout the whole thing, stick with the 2-finger tutorial, pushing down on the table to get it laid on. So overall, I was very happy with the line quality and performance from the 210 stencil cap. The different size range was definitely versatile. Starting with the 2mm, I would really save that for some really fine detail work and keeping some skinny highlights on something. The line of the 2mm was quite a bit softer, so you're not really going to get maybe that hard outline kind of style that I was trying to use with the larger stuff for. Every tool has a purpose here, so I definitely wouldn't knock it for having any of those effects, especially when the 4 and 6 have a really solid line and is really consistent as well. So talking about compatibility with cans, I found that the donut ring here fit on all the designer cans I use it on. As I talked about earlier, the compatibility with the 210 between all these designer cans was pretty good throughout the entire piece. The iron lac had that little cap trouble at the beginning, but getting a good cap on there and removing that color donut seemed to alleviate all those issues. I used some iron lac sugar as well throughout that, and this worked flawlessly even without taking the color donut off. I was able to use the gray dot right on this, making this probably my favorite can to use with this right now. The low pressure of the sugar made it super easy to get a consistent line and really not have to move too fast on the page. And I saw very similar effects with the Belton Molotov. I would highly recommend using those lower pressure cans with the stencil cap. That kind of goes without saying, if you're able to spray out a little bit slower pace, you're going to get those lines a little bit more consistent, and it's not going to be violently spraying a bunch of extra paint around. I did see a little bit more spitting from the iron lac than those other cans, and even fresh paint was working great with all the different sizes. So with the lower pressure being much more desirable, you can also just save, the last half of some cans and use those with this instead. That'll naturally give it a little bit lower pressure even if you do have something that's medium to high like the fresh paint. So while using the iron lac vegan tip on the iron lac can, I did notice that the line of sight from the can didn't quite line up with this hole. That was alleviated when I used the German level system, but that's something to keep in mind. The gray dot was perfectly lined up, so you might just want to stick with that cap when using this. By no means am I going to go find every skinny cap and see if it's compatible with this. The gray dot works flawlessly, so definitely have a few extra on hand and use those. You're not spraying a ton of spray paint here, so I didn't see a ton of clogging from the caps. Next time I go about using the stencil caps, I'm going to grab some new gray dots, just so I'm using fresh caps. When I was digging through my bin trying to find something for the iron lac to be compatible with, the stuff that wasn't spraying a super fresh and clean line ended up getting a little bit clogged up throughout the work. With the excess paint ending up in this mop body, I really can't consider that wasted paint like we've seen with some other stencil caps. You're really getting the full ability to reuse this, and with having a couple extra bottles on hand, I was able to easily keep the colors separated. And then even when I had half-filled bottles of both, combining them for my own color was a sweet addition. If I were able to categorize a perfect stencil cap, it would be to include a way to capture and reuse the paint. In an ideal situation, you don't even have to waste the paint and you can get these lines anyways. But right now, this is definitely the leading option for salvaging as much of that paint as possible. I gotta give Twinkie a spot-on job with designing this to catch that paint really so effortlessly. The 6mm got the most use throughout this review, but I really don't see too much paint buildup on there. A lot of it did make it down into the mop body, with a little bit collecting throughout the slide. This is made of plastic, but it's supportive of dunking this in acetone to help clean off that paint. I don't see much need for that as the hole's still pretty clear, but that's a good note to have that these can be totally cleaned out after a little bit of use. It's really awesome to see the ingenuity that Twinkie put into designing this product. It's definitely got my seal of approval for being an awesome stencil cap to use. I'm not the fan of painting solely at super small sizes. I see having these skinny lines as an awesome addition to cutting back and using them in larger pieces to get some of that really skinny detail. It definitely adds a level of ease when you're trying to get those super small lines. You can move a lot slower and you really don't have to worry about maybe cutting back 2 or 3 times just to skinny up a line. I think this fits great into an arsenal if you're trying to get those smaller details in some of your pieces, as well as allowing you to get that skinny line on the first pass and not having to rework sections a few times. If you're interested in grabbing one of these, they're available through Krewline.com here in the US, as well as some other websites if you're international to the United States. I'll have all that information linked in the description of the video, as well as some Instagram and social medias that are associated with the 210 stencil cap. Now, talking about the $25 price point for the cap, I'd say that's a super fair price for everything that you're getting. This is a one-man show designing and developing the product and getting them shipped out both domestically and internationally. I see a ton of innovation with this product, and it handles the concept of getting that stencil cap flawlessly. My recommendation, if you are going to go after just one, is I find that the 6mm gives me the best line performance in combination with, being still a very small line. I wouldn't find myself needing a size much smaller than the 6mm anyways, but keep that in mind if you are trying to get those super teeny detailed work. Maybe some of the 2 or the 4 might work a little better for you. Once again, be sure to head over to the Krewline website and check out some more details on the product. I'll have that information linked in the description of the video. And if you enjoyed the video, spraying the like button or joining the crew by subscribing goes tremendously far in keeping to support more videos like this. I hope the review was informative, showing the different aspects of the 210 stencil cap, and I had a great time putting together this piece. If you enjoyed the art related content, I post weekly videos that do cover the process, like last week's where I did a tutorial on designing your own vinyl decals, or even making art and reviewing products just like this video. Check out some of my previous stuff on screen right now. I'll catch you guys next week. That's gonna do it for me. Peace.